they got guys who have played. They're not taking a chance on the top 100 recruit who didn't pan out at Georgia or whatever, and well, maybe we can fix him type of thing. They've got guys who have done it, and a handful of them who have done it at the Power 4 level. So that's a little bit different than their portal approach last year, which was, hey, it's spring and we need dudes.
Welcome back, or welcome to Y Option. I'm your host, Yogi Roth, as always, joined by Jim Thornby. And it has been a fun and a little bit of a newsworthy offseason, right? Most recently, if you listen to the most recent episode, we just talked about Troy Taylor being fired at Stanford. What is Stanford going to do? Let us know what you think. Hit us up on Substack or on social media. We've had Todd Blackledge on. We went big picture, Big Ten. We had Max Brosmer on. We talked also Big Ten quarterbacks. We just had Marcus Arroyo on. Love that conversation because it's about what his off year was like, a sabbatical. I think every coach should have one. Sometimes they get forced on you. Troy Taylor, he's going to be going through that, I'd imagine. Now, how will he navigate that? Marcus Arroyo might have the blueprint for how to navigate that. So listen to that. And today, we are going hyper-specific. So for UW fans, I'll also say for Oregon fans, everybody doesn't like UW, or even the Coug fans, right? You want to learn about Jedd Fisch's second year. We are the place today. We're going to talk about year 2 under Jedd Fisch. We also, as a guest, presented as always by our founding partner, 76. It is Christian Caple. You know his content on Montlake. He is an amazing man. Can't wait to hear about his journey with Substack, a fellow Substacker as well, Jim. And just an overall great guy who, to us at least, like covers this team with tremendous detail. I don't want to make it a competition, but if you're looking for an answer, Christian likely has it around the dogs. That's right. So we'll even ask him about Nigel Burton's son, because I love watching Jace. We've seen him, right?
He was listed in his most recent article, or second to most recent article at the time of this recording. I've got my, even though you mentioned, the Washington audience, the Oregon audience, a few other audiences, and that one you didn't mention was the Arizona audience, which is still a good portion of them have still not kind of gotten past things. But as you can see, even despite all of my Arizona-ness in the background here, I am wearing purple today. It is a Beastie Boys shirt, not a UW Husky shirt, but I'm trying to heal the wounds here. Like it's for us, the Arizona fans. And I know we're going to talk about some guys that were at one time Arizona players, coming up here, but it's time to turn the page and just worry about what's going on.
Okay, so let me ask you that, because that's an interesting note, because amid realignment, and I think the knee-jerky or like the sudden changes that have happened in the sport that we love so much and cover with tremendous detail from here in LA all the way across the country. We even had Kalen DeBoer on the podcast about a month and a half ago. To me, Jedd Fisch leaving Arizona was like 5 years ago. I know it wasn't. Right. But it feels like that because there's so much that has gone on. Right now we have spring ball with Brent Brennan, and we've talked about this. It's truly his team. Right. Tetero McMillan preparing for the NFL draft. Noah Fafita comes on back. It feels like it's his team. He's lost, obviously, some guys to the portal. A couple other guys went to UW. But I don't feel that anymore. But I didn't go there. Right. I don't live it like you have as an alum. I'm curious, in the circles you run in, have they moved through that yet, or is that still like a salty wound? Because we're going to talk about Jonah Coleman. We're going to talk about some of the players that had been at your school, Jim, that now are donning the colors up in Seattle.
Yeah, I think it's on a little bit of a pause right now because March is still Arizona basketball season, and with the run that they're going on, that's where the focus of most people in Tucson is right now, is on the basketball team. So like once that ends and it truly turns back into, okay, it's football season, Jacob Manu just left, Takario Davis just left, there's a few more guys that just left from this past season to go there. But I think the wounds aren't as deep as they were. And I think, being in different conferences, just you start to drift a little. That's what we're here for, is to kind of keep everybody together. But you do start to like drift a little bit more because you are looking at, like, as a UW fan, you're like, oh, what's Iowa's schedule look like this year? If you're Arizona fan, you're like, oh, who's the quarterback at UCF this year? You're starting to ask those questions, and maybe not as dialed in to some of these other schools that you had been to in the past. So it will be interesting once basketball season ends and the calendar comes back to football season, how much attention UW gets from the fans in Tucson, or if they're ready to move on. Personally, I'm ready to move on. I have a different viewpoint. Obviously, haven't lived in Tucson in a long time by this point, even though my family still is in Arizona. But I had a working relationship with Jedd, being in the conference and being in coaches meetings and stuff like that, and having, getting feedback both ways in that sense. So like on that respect, I don't view it the same way as your average fan in Tucson. I can understand their, how they felt about things, but like for me, I think about what I'm using the royal we here for Arizona, what we were prior to Jedd, and it was really bad. Like it was a time where you don't want to go back to. And I think we need to celebrate pulling out of that more than like what we're missing out on now.
Yeah.
Or technically, or quote unquote missing out on now.
Yeah. I think there's so many layers to that. Like, with our kids, when they come home and they're like in a mood and they light you up or they light me up based on like the littlest thing, by 8:00 at night, you realize that there were like 5 other things that happened that day. They got them to that point. Right. And I think that it's important to note, like, I think there's a conference thing that happens sometimes. Like, here's the Big Ten. Granted, UW is not getting a full share, but it's got so much more money than everybody else. And then here's the Big 12, which is like, no, don't slot us in CFP spots. Like, let us compete with that. So I think there's like layers to the timing, of course. Look, I got no problem going to revisionist history. Like, Jedd was waiting on a long-term deal at Arizona too. That's widely been discussed that never showed up, right? For whatever reason, right? Clearly the schools had concerns around, finances, et cetera. Neither here nor there, because today's focus is on UW. Jedd Fisch is there. I will continue to stay on the table. I'm a huge fan. I've known Jedd for over 20 years now. I think he's a really gifted coach. Year 2 for him, or as he will always like to say, hey, his first year there is kind of a year 0. It's ground zero. You're trying to just navigate it. I thought they navigated a new conference in NIL at a really high level. Like, and by that, I mean, the way that it works now, like here comes this second portal window. In our opinion here, this will be the final second portal window ever, right? I believe that next year, Jim, what's going to happen is everything's going to move to June. There's going to be one portal window. It's going to be like the NFL and OTAs, bye to spring games. Like you could have a showcase. You can have fans there. I hope that stuff still happens. I know Jedd loves it. But in my opinion, everything I'm being told, like this entire calendar is going to shift. So to that point, last year they get there. And when you get there as late as they do and you hit that second portal window, who are the most valuable people in the second portal? The big guys. So you just get leveraged. And there weren't a lot of elite players up front. So UW, to me, said, all right, well, let's not spend the farm in year 1 in Seattle. Let's save it for now. Now their salary cap, you can call it $15, $20 million to really make the moves that they think need to be made. In addition, we've talked about this in previous episodes, DeMond Williams at quarterback. I think as of today, among the people we know or believe to be the starters in this league in the Big Ten, DeMond Williams is the most dynamic dual threat quarterback in the league. Most dynamic and a seasoned player. He does not look like a freshman when you see him. He's a physical, he's a thick dude. We had him at the Elite 11. I can't wait to watch him. They got a couple other people that are going to return for this season. So I'm curious for you, Jim, like as you look at the landscape, I know you did some research on this, like big picture, how do you see UW? And then I'll give you my thoughts on where I think they're going to go heading into the spring.
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head there with the offensive line. Because, I mean, you think about those 2 years with Michael Penix. And I thought, obviously, I think one of the underrated but yet defining stats in that Penix area was how few times he got sacked.
Yeah.
His last year there, they got the UW quarterbacks. I think they were all Penix. I'd have to go back, but the UW quarterbacks as a whole got sacked 11 times in that season. Last year, 39 times.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's obviously different style of play, different, there's all sorts of factors that can factor into that. But offensive line is such a huge piece of that. And I know that's, one of the things that, Christian has written about many times over this offseason about how they're fixing that up. But to your point, they've got a lot of dudes coming back that are exciting on the offensive side. And they're coming off what is really kind of like just a bonkers kind of season when you really look at it. Like they finished the year 6-7, which, I'm not one to usually hang a hat on the bowl game result, but there's a different mentality of coming out of a 7-6 season to a 6-7 season. Is that, even though that's that one game swing, but they were 6-0 at home last year, 0-7 outside of outside of Husky Stadium. Yes, because I'm trying to think the neutral site game was in Seattle,
Lumen
but
Field. Yeah.
Yes, but so outside of Husky Stadium, they were 0-7, which is obviously they got to figure that out. But on that offensive side, you look at Damon Williams. He took over those final two games, the last game of the regular season against Oregon, and then the bowl game, lights out. Jonah Coleman, a former Arizona guy, we saw his build the progression, capped over 1,000 yards last year, 10 rushing touchdowns. Had 23 catches out of the backfield as well, so multi-talented there. And then Denzel Boston is probably going to be one of the top receivers. He was one of the top receivers in the Big Ten last year, but he'll be really high on that list for this upcoming season. He had 63 catches last year, 834 yards, 9 receiving touchdowns. But the guys that were all around him, whether it be Josh Jackson, Jeremiah Hunter, Kaleki Latu at tight end, like those guys are all gone. So he's got to figure out how they're supplementing him, so it's not just a one guy attack in that passing game.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Of those 39 sacks, I think 9 came against Oregon, where Damon Williams got the start.
I think you're right.
So I to your point, like I say it all the time on this. It's like a bad record. Like you have to have scars at the position. Damon has them, and he's just plowed his way through them. Everything I've been told about him this offseason has been electric and elite. They're on the verge of starting spring practice, is why we are bringing on Christian Caple. I think an interesting storyline is the departure of both coordinators. I mean, you had such a unique environment there. You had a guy who we know well in Brendan Carroll, and then you had Steve Belichick. Of course, their fathers are Bill and Pete. They have both gone to North Carolina and the Raiders, respectively, to work for their Hall of Fame coaching fathers. So Jedd Fisch, he's got a massive network. He doesn't flinch. Elevates Jimmy Doherty, who's been with him since he's been at Arizona, and he was with them when he was at UCLA there for a moment. Remember, Jedd was the interim head coach when Jim Mora was let go back in the day when Josh Rosen was the quarterback, and DTR was there as well. So I'm excited for Jimmy. I think Jimmy's a stud. He's the next wave of head coaches. They win 8-9 games next year, which we'll get to in a second. Jimmy Doherty's going to have a lot of shots to call his shot. Whether that's a group of 5, who knows? But I think Jimmy has the tools necessary to be a head coach. Then they go on the defensive side. They get Ryan Walters, who was the head coach at Purdue. And the last time he was calling defense, it was best defense, I think, in America, in Illinois when he was there. And he's a young coach, right? Coming off a 2-year stint that clearly was challenging at Purdue. Lessons learned. And now you get to go into this Jedd Fisch organization that is really built like a pro model, right? That is the thing that every program is saying they are doing, with the GM side of it, personnel side of it, the football side of it. But Jedd's been doing it since he got to Arizona. You go back and listen to my podcast when Jedd was with the Rams in LA. I had him on, and he talked about his vision, his philosophy, how he would see a program. He talked about the pro model then. We've seen it implemented now at 2 different stops. So I think it's a really cool opportunity for both of those coaches to coordinate their respective offense. They also just elevated the offensive line position. Tremendous regard for their now current offensive line coach. So I think they're in a really good spot. And then I go to this, man, the XO side of this thing. Jedd Fisch's X's and O's, I think, are as enjoyable to watch as anybody in college football on offense. He calls the plays. He's one of very few guys that are still calling it on offense. And they're always in position to win the game. Like I get it. Some of those games last year got away from him, right? I called the Indiana game. You go to the game against Iowa, the Rutgers game. It was like they were in a club on a Friday night. It was absolutely crazy. It was bonkers. But I think lessons learned, and now away they go. So you look at their schedule now. Florida, to me, is bowl game. Florida, to me, is bowl game. Ceiling is, can you get to 10 wins again? I mean, you got Colorado State, future Pac-12 school. UC Davis, which we all love. Welcome to Shredville. Huge fan of their head coach, Tim Plow. They won't be easy games to kick the party off. You got 2 at home. Then you go to Wazoo. We know what that'll be. That'll be a challenge. But you're much you're a more talented team heading into this year's rivalry game. The sting will always be there, but it won't be as what it was a year ago. It's just going to be different. It's going to be hard to go get that win. But on paper, you start off 3-0, get Ohio State at home. Okay, that'll be hard. Then you go to Maryland, chance to win that game. Rutgers at home, got a chance to win that game. At Michigan, okay, that's a challenge. Illinois is a top 15 team walking into the season. They're kind of like, they'll be the sexy team. Everybody will put them in the 10, 11, 12 seed in the CFP heading into the season. At Wisconsin, up in the air. Purdue should win on paper. UCLA up in the air on the road late November. And then Oregon. So again, like, you don't leave. And I love this stat that we come up with every year now with the Big Ten. From November 8th is the last time they're going to leave Pacific time zone. So their last 3 games are going to be out west. And I do think that matters. USC dealt with that last year. I think that it helped them. UCLA dealt with that last year. I think that it helped them. They're both going to deal with that again this year in terms of not having to necessarily leave the time zone. UCLA leaves it once. USC doesn't leave it at all in the final month of the season. So for UW, 6 wins is the floor. Can they steal one with Illinois, Wisconsin, UCLA? We know what Ohio State and Michigan are. Who knows? I mean, there'll be fun games. We'll tune in and watch them. But the point is, Jedd's X's and O's, I believe, will always give their team a chance. And you have a dual threat quarterback. And you know you have coordinators that are really savvy, especially one who's got Big Ten experience in Coach Walters.
Ready, set, dream cabin nestled in the woods. Just 4 hours to go. New job halfway across the country. Butterflies before a first date. Wherever you go, 76 fuels all the ways you go, go, go.
So I can't wait. I'm going to be up there in a couple weeks, a little over a month for their spring game. Man, it's going to be so fun to come on back and give a recap, because now we're about to get a preview from Christian, and I cannot wait to hear from Christian Caple. So anything you got, Jim, before we get to him?
No, it's funny, and I'll end this with another Arizona part of this. Like, on the defensive side, like there will be a lot of familiar names, for 2 sevens and stuff like it, because you have Prysock and Takaria Davis at the corners. We'll see with Jacob Manu what his deal is after getting hurt last year, and how he recovers, and is he going to be able to fill in, because they're gonna have a hole at linebacker. Carson Bruner's gone, Tuputala's gone, so from obviously a very biased skew on that from my lens as I'm looking at this team, but they got to figure out how to win some road games this year, and I think they have winnable road games this year when you look at it. Wazoo, Maryland, Michigan, Wisconsin, UCLA. They needed, I would say, at least 2 of those.
Yeah, the lessons learned from Rutgers last year, I think, will be such a benefit to this team, because that's Maryland, right? We saw with SC, they lost at Maryland, which they should have beat, right? Minnesota, I think Minnesota was a better team, you could argue, but you could have that debate back and forth with those two. But for UW, I think the lessons learned on the road in year 1, I think it'd be monumental for Jedd Fisch. Can't wait till they get to spring ball, because it's now just a matter of almost hours, it feels like, before they kick it off. We will be there in about a little over a month. But right now, let's bring on a man who knows this team as well as anybody in America, Christian Caple. Go to On Montlake. That is his Substack. He writes. They do an incredible podcast. Say Who, Say Pod. If you're a UW fan, you know what that reference is. So here we go. Presented by our founding partner, 76. Always keeping you in the know on the go, go, go. Such a proud partner for us here at Y Option, and a proud friend of Christian Caple is us. So cannot wait to bring him in. Let's have that conversation right now. Say Who, Say Pod. No, I won't do the rest of it. No, just as mentioned, it's Christian Caple on Montlake. Say Who, Say Pod is his podcast. You absolutely crush it. You thrive. It's been fun getting to know you over the years, man. Welcome to the first time coming on this podcast, though. Thank you for the time.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. It's when you guys sent the invite, I was thinking about talking with you and Jim in Houston, I guess 14 and a half months ago now. Crazy how time flies. Nobody really knew what the future held there. And, here you guys are doing your thing, and you've made the transition to Big Ten Network and all that. So it's just like life goes on, man.
I know, it's crazy how that happens, right? We see it through our kids. And then I think sometimes we have to zoom out to see it in our own lives too. And, I'm sure for you, and I want to hear about this, like when you made that pivot to create this, I could see your tweet like it was yesterday, like, hey, no longer going to be here. And then what was it? A couple hours later, hey, going to start this here. And then a couple days later, the thing had become a thing. When you reflect on that, because you're beginning year 3 in the creation of On Montlake and running this thing, how do you view that moment in time back in the day?
Yeah, it's crazy because it was like 6 days after I got laid off. And I think if you do what I do, especially if you cover one team, there's been enough people go independent, whether because they lost, had a job loss, or they chose to do it voluntarily, that it at least crosses your mind at some point of, could I do that? What would that look like? And it didn't cross my mind very long over the years before I instantly would think, nah, there's no way. I would never do that. I'd see people go independent and think, man, best of luck. Like, I'm glad I'm not in a position where I have to do something like that, because I don't know what that would look like. But after I got laid off by The Athletic, like, I just heard from so many people who just said, hey, let us know what's next, and we're with you. And talking with my wife and with some family members and other people who had made the independent leap and those sort of things, I thought, why don't I just try it? I'm definitely not going to get hired by anybody else to cover University of Washington football. There's like 2 or 3 other outlets that would even hire somebody to do that, and pretty sure those jobs are occupied. So I didn't know what to expect. I certainly didn't expect the response I got right away. Definitely benefited from timing. I don't know that anyone was predicting Washington to be in the national championship game, but they were a preseason top 10-ish type of team. They were coming off an 11-2 season. They're bringing everybody back. Penix was going to be in the Heisman conversation. So there was a lot of excitement around the program, which I think helped. And then, man, from there, I've called it the most newsworthy year in the history of the program. And I think it's pretty indisputable at this point. They moved from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten. Jen Cohen leaves for USC. They hire a new athletic director. They have one of the most remarkable seasons they've ever had. Their quarterback ends up being the Heisman runner-up. They go to the national championship game. Their head coach leaves for Alabama. Hire a new coach. Had to hire a new athletic director just after I celebrated my 1-year anniversary. So that kicked off year 2. But definitely got fortunate with the timing. But it's been an amazing ride so far.
Yeah, I'm curious for you when you look back on that, because it's a fair take. If you think of like sports media in at least the length of our collective careers, it would be like publication and then person, right? So insert in Seattle Times, LA Times, like New York Times, The Athletic, and then the person. Now I'm wondering, in your role, has it flipped to like the person, right? You could call it On Montlake, you can call it ChristianCaple.com. Like, it's you running this thing. Like, how do you feel as how coaches have viewed you, players have viewed you and your content as life has shifted? You could argue media has shifted. The lens on media may be a little bit more blurred than ever before. And I'm curious, for somebody who's living it day to day, what you might think about that.
I don't think young people care. I think there's a group of people who are there every day asking them questions. And if you're part of that group of people and you show up every day, do they know this person works for the Seattle Times and this person works for The Athletic? This person works for Dogman, whoever it is. I don't know. And if they do, I think if you're part of the beat, you're part of the beat. One thing I've noticed myself doing when I reach out to somebody cold who I don't know, if I text, a recruit, for example, or somebody's parent, or, whoever it is, I find that I don't mention my outlet. I just say that, hi, hey, my name is Christian Caple and I'm a reporter covering University of Washington football. Because in my mind, if I say onmontlake.com, like, that probably doesn't mean anything to them, and if they're savvy enough where they do care about that sort of thing, they'll ask, who do you work for? And I'll tell them. Other times I've reached out, if it's somebody kind of more in the business, I might say, hey, my name's Christian. I cover University of Washington football. I was at The Athletic for 4 years. Now I'm on my own, just to kind of I feel like I need to establish, no, I'm not just some guy. I didn't just start a site out of nowhere. I've done this. I've been in the mainstream media. Maybe that matters. Maybe it doesn't. But with with coaches, with administrators, like I think as long as they see that you take it seriously and you care and you want to do the job a certain way, you're not a fan who's just out there because you want to be part of it and want to say that you were at practice or say that you were in the press box or say that you got to interview, player A or player B, and you're clearly a professional and there to do a job. I think that's what stands out the most. And also, like, there's enough like institutional understanding at Washington of just who I am as a person, because I've been around, that if ever, whether it's Jedd Fisch or anybody else wants to ask the SID staff, hey, who's so On Montlake? What is that? Like, there are enough people there to be like, oh no, like he's legit. At least I hope that's what they would say. But like he's been around, like he's a reporter, he's not a knucklehead.
I know. I mean, well, think about you too. I mean, you started as a student reporter, and I think it was Ty Willingham, right? When you were getting going in the States.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, to now. And I remember being up there all the time when Sark was the head coach, and that was really when I began when I stopped coaching and then started covering the Pac. I can remember calling Sark's game. It was UW at Stanford, and it was Jim Harbaugh was on the sideline. Andrew Luck was playing quarterback. Like, I remember that like it was yesterday. I'm curious for you, like, did you always want to be on a beat? Like, I think that phrase is really cool, number one. And I don't think people are coming up anymore being like, I want to be on a beat or even understand what that is like. You live that every day. Was that always a vision that you had for yourself when you were a student reporter?
I think it was. And you're right. Like, that's, it's not what, if you ask any young journalist, like, what do you want to do? Where do you want to be in 10 years or whatever? Most of them will say, I want to be a features writer. I want to be an enterprise writer. I want to write big, long prestige profiles, or I want to be a columnist. I probably would have said that for a time too. I wanted to be a columnist eventually. And that role is not extinct, but it's kind of going away. Like, the person who only writes opinion and only writes whatever they want all the time. There's not a lot of those jobs left. So I don't know. There was something about, I covered Washington at a time when media was changing and newspapers were down, obviously, but there was still, the Seattle Times had someone out there every day. The Everett Herald had someone out there every day. The Tacoma News Tribune had someone out there every day. There were recruiting sites, the student paper, and you saw as a student these professionals who traveled to every game and were there on a daily basis in a way where they were able to like build relationships with these people you covered and who people watched on TV and knew about, and they're writing about things that thousands of people care about. And something about focusing on one subject long enough to build like a legitimate amount of institutional knowledge always appealed to me. And I don't know, I was, I guess, drawn to kind of the beat lifestyle. And some of it now is just being stubborn about like, well, I can't ever know as much about any other program as I know about Washington. It's just not possible, right? Like, just logistically speaking, and just, I'd have to do it till I was 80 years old or whatever. So I guess in that sense, that's maybe one of the bigger reasons why I wouldn't want to try to do it somewhere else. Because I know what's possible in terms of like knowledge accumulation on one subject, and I know I would fall short anywhere else. So
yeah, I want to follow up on that, because I think that's really cool. Like, you see UW football through a lens that has not seen anything else, and I would imagine a high percentage of your paid subscribers are similar. They want UW stuff. They've been following this team. I'm not necessarily that guy. I pay for you every month. I love proud partner and
there we go,
and contributing member of your family's income. And I want to be. I love what you're doing. To that point, though, I wonder, is it a challenge for you to see it through the lens of your opponent's fan base, through the big, like, how do you, when you sit down to write a column and to write down your thoughts from what you've seen, are you thinking, this is who my audience is? Like, how are you navigating multiple audiences? Or you just want to be so hyper dialed that if you're a UW fan, you come. If you're curious about Michigan because they play UW mid-season next year, maybe you'll come for a week or two.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it, I'm very much writing directly to like the UW fan who's watched every snap of every game for the last 10 years, And if you're younger than that and haven't watched games for 10 years, that's fine too. But, I covered Wazoo for almost 2 years, right at the start of the Mike Leach era. I started that January. He'd been on the job like a month or whatever. So that was a nice transition. That was my first like beat job, my first job at like a newspaper where, you're traveling and you're kind of the, one of the main people covering the team. Right. And I felt like I approached it similarly, where I went to UW, but I got a ton of friends who went to Wazoo. I feel like I know that fan base well, obviously know it a lot better than I did before I did that job. And I felt like I tried to write from the perspective of like someone who really, this story is for someone who really cares about the program and pays close attention and doesn't just want the broad, bullet points on what happened. There's a sense of like, you're always objective and, you're not living and dying with who wins the games and loses the games. But I do think people want to feel like you're in it with them to a certain extent. Not that your heart is racing when it's 4th and goal at the 1 yard line in the last few seconds like theirs is, but that you understand what their experience is. You understand what that's like for them. So I think that gives you a lot of credibility. And the way I kind of look at it is I'm kind of like I'm like your neutral tour guide for UW football, right? Like I'm here to hopefully help you understand this thing you love a little bit better. And, hopefully you feel like I get you along the way.
I love that. All right. I want to get into the team in a minute, but one more question, and this is like super selfish for us because I've watched your content grow and evolve. How do you negotiate like what's in front of the paywall or behind the paywall? Because our first year, it was like everything's for free, right? Our strategy is like our podcasts, our audio, our video for free. And then since the end of the season, we started putting what we would consider some of our premium written content behind the paywall. I'm curious for you how you navigated that early on and maybe where you've even netted out to today.
Yeah, it's a good question because I really don't know what the right approach is. I know like Justin Ferguson, who covers Auburn, has his own Substack, is doing great. He's someone I talked with before I started. He did. Yeah. Like I think when he launched, he said his first month was going to be everything's free so you can get a sense of what it is. Then after that, it's pretty clamped down. I started out and I probably have kept up this cadence of paywalling like 80% of what I write. The podcast is free that I do with Danny O'Neill. That'll probably always be free. I had a deal with a local radio station for the first couple years to share a story that I would unlock for them to publish, and then also did like an exclusive thing for them each week too. So I would kind of treat that as my unpaywalled free story for the week. I'm not doing that anymore. So I think I've paywalled everything since then, but certain stories that I want people to read, I want people to see, like, for example, Nate Robinson had been battling, his kidneys were failing for the last couple of years. He'd been on dialysis and he needed a transplant, and they found one for him through a video that they played putting out a call for donors at UW spring game last year. And, big Husky fan, season ticket holder saw it. His wife had been a kidney donor some years back, and he thought, you know what, I can do that. They had the same blood type. He went through the process. It was a match. Anyway, Nate has the procedure. He publicizes it on social media. He posts a picture with the guy, and I recognize his name because he's a subscriber. And I reached out to him and just said, hey, would you be up for talking about this? And he was, and he's great, super good guy, great dad, great family. And I just thought, maybe I'd sell a few more subscriptions if I put a paywall on this, but I'm not gonna. Like, I just think this is the kind of story that people will like to read and will enjoy. And I want it to be out there in the world. So there's certain examples like that too, but I end up paywalling most things anymore.
Yeah, I appreciate the candor. Okay, so let's talk about some of the content that you've written in advance of this spring. Spring ball is a little less than a week ago by the time this conversation comes out. It is year 2 for Jedd Fisch. I know often he'll reference like year 1 is really like a year 0. Like you're just trying to navigate it. They navigate a late hire. They navigate a late portal window. They navigate a challenging schedule on the road in the Big Ten. And now, even though they've lost some coaches, notably Brendan Carroll and Steve Belichick, it feels like he's been there for longer than a couple weeks or a couple months. I'm curious for someone who's there every day, like, how do you feel if you had to give a state of the Washington Huskies program right now? How might you do it?
Yeah, I think expectations are going to be higher in year 2, not markedly higher. It feels like more of a, hey, this could be an 8-win, 9-win on the optimistic end of things team. Whereas last year, I do kind of think, hey, if they make a bowl game, that's great, was sort of the expectation. There's so much excitement around Damon Williams, and excitement that has been elevated by the head coach himself, which is kind of the opposite of what the culture at Washington has been in the past. Like it almost irritated Chris Peterson when there was too much hype around how good his players were. He kind of wanted to tamp it down. Jedd is a little bit more of a showman that way, right? He knows that we live in an attention economy, and as much hype and good vibes as you can build around your players and get people excited about your program so that they might buy tickets and come out and watch you play and tune in and come to the spring game or turn on the season opener on TV, whatever it is. He wants that. He wants eyeballs on those guys. So it feels a little bit different that way. The big question marks are on the offensive and defensive lines. I think until people see progress there, it's going to be hard to believe that they really can take that next step in the Big Ten. But those position groups look totally different than they did a year ago. You probably heard they had something like 7 scholarship offensive linemen last spring. They got 16, they got 17 for the 2025 season, but 16 of them are on campus already. They signed 5 offensive linemen in their 2025 class. 4 of them are already on campus and are going to be there for spring. They got Carver Willis, who's probably going to be their starting left tackle or right tackle, but he's a sure starter. They went out and got Garen Hatchett back from Oklahoma, spent his year in Norman. He's back playing with his younger brother, Landon, who's going to start at center. So there's finally a little bit, starting to be a little bit of a veteran presence on the offensive line. Still got to figure a lot of things out, but it feels like they're trending in the right direction. They've taken a step forward. There's a ton of excitement around what Jonah Coleman and Denzel Boston can do around Damon Williams. But people are, I think, really waiting to see what the trenches look like before they get too excited.
Talk about getting excited, watching Jonah Coleman's social media and the transformation of his body. I mean, I would have thought under his pads throughout the entirety of his career, he looked like he did in terms of how he looks now after his offseason program. I'm curious for you, like, he's clearly a mission-minded guy. He's incredible in the classroom. He's truly like an old school student athlete in that regard. I think he had a chance to be one of the best backs in the Big Ten, if not America. I think Damon Williams is the most, as of today, the most dynamic quarterback returning in the league. We did a whole conversation at yoption.com around that because of his dual threat ability and being a pure passer. And then you add in the coordinator element, whether it's Jimmy helping on offense, now elevated the offensive coordinator, and most notably, Coach Walters coming to the defensive side. I'm curious if you could touch on Jonah and then a couple guys defensively, because they do have some holes to fill, and what you've gleaned from that heading into spring.
Yeah, Jonah Coleman, I mean, if they didn't have such an obvious young star at quarterback, Jonah Coleman would be the face of the program. He kind of felt like that last year, where he was the first transfer from Arizona to commit to come with the coaching staff. He's fiercely loyal to Jedd Fisch and Scotty Graham. He's made that very clear. He got a 4.0, I think, his first or second quarter at UW. Said he wanted to come back his senior year to finish and get his degree. He's I think what a coach would call a culture champion, right? He was as important to that effort of transferring Arizona's team culture to Washington and being that guy in the locker room who was going to get buy-in from players, which coaches talk about having player-led programs. Well, if you're going to have a player-led program, Jonah Coleman's the kind of guy you want kind of leading that effort. And then, oh, by the way, he rushed for 1,000 yards behind a kind of a patchwork offensive line against a really tough schedule in the Big Ten. So you're right. I mean, I feel like his reputation physically has always been that he's just this jacked, kind of shorter guy who can run through tackles, and that's what he's been. But yeah, I mean, he looks like he's really dedicated himself this offseason to, he told me in February, he wanted to get faster. He wanted to show that breakaway speed. I think when he uses that vision and quickness to create an opening for himself, he wants to leave people in the dust and not get caught from behind. And I think also to be able to carry the ball more. He averaged just shy of 15 carries a game last year. I know he was a little bit dinged up. There were some games where it'd be the fourth quarter and you'd kind of think, man, they should go to Jonah here. And then afterward, Fisch would say, yeah, I mean, he's, we're trying to keep him fresh. We're trying to preserve him. So, it reminds me a little of Romo Dunze that way, oddly. Played a different position, but, he talked to us the offseason before his, big year in 2023 about, yeah, like I want to withstand contact better. I want to stay healthier. I played through bumps and bruises, but I want to avoid those. I want to be big and strong and be able to be 100% as often as possible. So maybe you'll see that from Jonah Coleman this year.
They lose really talented linebackers, really productive linebackers, I should say, as well, in the middle of that defense. They bring in Coach Walters, who is elite at that craft. He knows this league better than anybody on that staff, just based on time on task, time spent there, whether it was in Illinois or Purdue. I know Coach Fisch was thrilled when they had a chance to bring him in after losing Steve Belichick to North Carolina. How do you feel the defense is? Because this is a league that we've all learned, right, in year one, really being entrenched in the Big Ten. Like, you've got to be stout in your front seven. I mean, Christian, I called a game every weekend for the most part. I think we had 7 or 8 games where each team had 1 possession in the first quarter. Like, you have to win the line of scrimmage. I'm curious, you referenced the defensive line a little bit, but how about the front seven as a whole? What have you gleaned as spring ball is almost here?
Yeah, I think Fisch, one of the reasons, I mean, first of all, once Ryan Walters becomes available again as a coordinator, you'd have to put him on the short list of best available coordinators in the country based on what he last accomplished when he was calling plays at Illinois. I think one of the things Fisch was also really intrigued about was that I think his approach to personnel and packages and play calling is not dissimilar to the way Steve Belichick approached things, which of course is not dissimilar to the way Bill Belichick approaches things. Very multiple, almost loath to even like acknowledge that there are positions on the field, right? It's, hey, you get 11 guys and we're going to put those 11 guys wherever we think we can. You're not a linebacker, you're a football player. You're not a safety, you're a football player. And I think you've seen Walters, his scheme is often described as a 5-1-5. But they could have 2 inside linebackers on the field and go with just 4 guys up front. They might only play with 4 traditional DBs. They might have a nickel out there. It's going to be based on opponent, going to be based on opponent strengths and weaknesses, all those sort of things. I think the fact that he does traditionally like to put 5 guys on the line of scrimmage has to be pretty appealing to Jedd Fisch as he tries to build this Washington defense in a Big Ten mold. And then, yeah, I mean, I think last year offensively, they lost the 15 guys who played the most snaps for them offensively in 2023. It was a brand new offense in 2024. It's not quite that drastic defensively this year, but it's similar. Like, I think 9 of their top 10 tacklers, something like that, 8 of their top 10, 9 of their top 10 tacklers from last year are gone. Ephesians Prysock is kind of their only like every game starter who's back. They went out and got Ontario Thompson and Samote Pepa in the transfer portal to anchor that defensive line. That was a huge point of emphasis. They went out and got Buda Alukta from Washington State, X-Ray Alexander from UCF, 2 linebackers with a ton of production. That's the thing. I mean, Jedd Fisch last year in the spring portal, you get what you get. You needed to go add bodies, and whoever's available, like, you can't quibble over them maybe not being exactly who you want. You need to just fill out the roster. This year they got the winter portal window, and I remember before they played Indiana last year, a game you called, I believe, Jedd Fisch kind of marveling at Curt Cignetti's portal strategy, where he said he valued production over potential. And I kind of stored that away and watched Washington's portal this year, and it kind of seems, especially defensively, like they valued the same thing, right? Alukta's played a ton of tackles. Alexander's played a ton, got a bunch of tackles. Same thing's true of CJ Christian, a safety they brought in from Florida International. Same thing's true of Alex McLaughlin, a safety they brought in from Northern Arizona. Takario Davis, obviously, that came from Arizona. Staff's very familiar with him. Taitai Uiagalelei, kind of a hybrid DN, D tackle from Arizona. They got guys who have played. They're not taking a chance on the top 100 recruit who didn't pan out at Georgia or whatever, and well, maybe we can fix him type of thing. They've got guys who have done it, and a handful of them who have done it at the Power 4 level. So that's a little bit different than their portal approach last year, which was, hey, it's spring and we need dudes.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch it. I'm curious, as you've seen college football adjust really the last few months since the season ended. We've seen GMs hired. We saw UW hire somebody just to kind of navigate, I guess, what we'll just call the salary cap, for lack of a better detailed description there. Can you paint a picture of what like the front office at Washington football looks like now for the fans that are still trying to catch up to this new age version of college football?
Yeah, I mean, it's different. They built it out. They had to replace some positions too. Matt Doherty has been with Jedd Fisch since he was the head coach at Arizona. He's now senior director of player development. Really, I think has a lot of duties that other programs would put the general manager title on. Fisch's reasoning, and I get it, is that, hey, I've worked in the NFL. I know what the GM job is in the NFL. We're asking him to just focus on personnel, just focus on like, hey, help us put together the best roster possible, which is obviously an enormous job already. They got Marcus Griffin from Cal, who was in the personnel department there. He's their director of recruiting. They added a director of college scouting. So basically someone whose whole job is building a board off of the portal, right? And figuring out during the season, hey, if this guy goes in, or, where is the team's strengths and weaknesses that you want to address through a veteran acquisition instead of, through high school development. I don't think that's something that they had last year. They got a position in the personnel department dedicated to analytics and stats and leveraging that however they can. Couple other scouting assistants. So it's a pretty robust operation in terms of identification and evaluation and getting the right guys in front of the coaching staff to go recruit them. I'm going to be interested. Staffs obviously are no longer, there's no limit on coaches who can work with players, coaches who can be, on field, so to speak. But there's still a limit on who can go on the road and recruit. You can still only have 10 plus the head coach. It sounds like those 10 are going to be the traditional 10. You would think they might be. I'm curious to see, as the years kind of go by, does the NCAA update those rules? Do they remove those limits? If they don't remove those limits, do programs start to say, okay, well, should it be, should we maybe pull back a couple of these like main 10 assistants and instead have people in the personnel department who we hire who only do recruiting, and we use maybe our off-campus recruiting, slots on them? I'm curious to kind of see how that evolves too.
Yeah, I would do that. I've talked to a bunch of coaches about that literal concept of, instead of sending your receiver coach, Kevin Cummings, on the road, who is beloved across the country, send, the director of player development or personnel or the assistant receiver coach so they can go to every one of their home games or whatever it might be, just to have those touch points. So I think, there's another wave coming indeed. Before we cut you loose here, I do want to ask one final question. I've known Jedd for a long time. I've said it many times. I'm a huge believer in him, fan in him. I remember meeting him in Seattle. We were both interviewing for the Seahawks job the same day in 2009. I've had a tremendous relationship since then. I've never covered him every day like you have. I'm curious, for you, having covered Ty Willingham, right? Let me see if I can get them all. Ty, Steve Sarkisian, who came right after Steve, Coach Peterson, Kalen, and now here Jimmy Lake, in between those two, and now here we go with Jedd. Like, what has it been like covering a Jedd Fisch-led program for somebody who's covered this program for so many years?
Yeah, he's very straightforward. There are probably questions that he gets asked, questions I've asked him. I don't know that I could think of any off the top of my head as an example, but that it doesn't occur to me in the moment, but I think back on it and I'm like, there's not a lot of other head coaches I would have even bothered asking that, because I know they wouldn't have answered it directly. But with him, there's pretty much like, if it's an in-house personnel thing, like he'll sidestep it, and that's about it. Everything else, he kind of answers head on. Coaches with injuries, that's always going to be pretty secretive, and you always got to like read between the lines on whether this guy's actually going to play this week or not. Or so there, he's a pretty straight shooter. It's interesting that way. Definitely wants his guys, so to speak, to be the players who speak for the team. And used to be a little bit more, past coaches that kind of, hey, whoever they want to talk to, let them talk. Where you clearly it's not just the captains, but the leadership circle, those type of guys. Those are the ones he wants kind of speaking for the program, and so that's been kind of interesting to kind of adapt to. But yeah, he is as straightforward about the impact of finances on college football as anybody is, and what it takes to retain players. And some coaches maybe might shy away from the NIL thing as much of a factor as it is, or being more of a factor than they want it to be. Whereas Jedd Fisch from day one just said, like, I think at his very first press conference, small group of reporters talking to him after he talked on the podium, and it was just like, yeah, we need to pay everybody a lot of money, and then which is just undeniably true. And it's weird to say that makes him an outlier for just speaking the truth, but you don't see a lot of coaches address it head on like that.
Yeah, I think what's so unique about him, of course, is the tree that he comes from, which is got tremendous variance, right? Like, to me, when you say he'll answer it direct, I'm like, yeah, that's Steve Spurrier. Of course he does, right? Like, he brings infectious energy. Pete Carroll, of course he does. He brings an energy and enthusiasm. Jim Harbaugh, of course. Like, you start going through that, and it's fun to watch really the palette of influences he's had become his. And I think that's what makes Jedd really a talented head coach, because he's not trying to be any of those guys. I think he's got great clarity from the McVays, from the Zach Taylors, from all the guys he's been around, which I think is why it's a really optimistic time to be a Washington fan heading into year 2 in the Big Ten. Super optimistic that you would come on when you said yes. We were fired up, Christian. So thank you again. Is there anything you can share with our listeners about On Montlake and things that might be coming up as spring ball's around the corner?
Yeah, man, just keep it tuned to onmontlake.com. That's pretty much it. I'm previewing currently every position group before spring starts. I'll be at every spring practice. They're all open, talking about Jedd wanting to showcase his program, right? Every spring practice and actual spring game. Washington's not, they're not joining that list of teams canceling the spring game. And Jedd Fisch is quite proud of that. And he'll say so, certainly. I'll be there documenting it, telling you who looks good, what things look like. You can catch buy a annual subscription for $65 or pay $8 a month. Or you can pay a little more and be a friend of the program and join a Zoom call to talk about UW football stuff with me and other people once a month. But yeah, keep it tuned there. We'll be there.
I love it. Thank you for the time. We will keep it tuned there for sure. It is one of our favorites to recommend at yoption.com. Myself, Guy Haberman, our entire crew at Big Ten Network, we'll be reading every single thing that you write in advance of broadcasting that spring game that you referenced under Jedd Fisch in year 2 in the Big Ten. Christian, thank you so much for your time. Say who, say pod. You know the rest of the song, man. Thank you for the time, brother.
All right. Thank you, Yogi. Thanks, Jim.
It's the Afterglow. Yogi Roth, joined by Jim Thornby. That was Christian Caple on montlake.com. Go there if you haven't already been. If you love UW football, if you want somebody who's truly in the trenches with Jedd Fisch and his program in year 2, let alone has been there since Ty Willingham in his final season, and everybody up until now, follow Christian Caple. He's a dear friend, somebody we're just really proud to have on as part of season 1 for us here at Y Option. Jim, you've known Christian for a long time. What was your takeaway from our conversation as you're navigating our Substack? He's running his. I was curious, like, what are you figuring out behind the scenes, and the notes you might have been taking during our dialogue?
Still a lot to dive in, once I really kind of digest all that part of it. But my favorite part of the interview was him talking about, the life of a beat writer and that institutional knowledge that he had for the years. And like, it's so relatable to what, our worlds. And like, we dive so head first into what we're doing, and you're studying so much, and you so much specificity. Well, that's a tongue twister right there, but so much around that you have to really get, dialed into, and and you just kind of block everything else out. And it's like, for the 12 years that, I worked at the Pac-12, I mean, I could probably count the number of SEC games I watched, on one hand, because you are so dialed into like knowing every little thing about, this team and the backup here and every little stat. And you can, that's part of what drives you in that success. And that's part of what's driven Christian to be able to be so successful going on his own, covering this team.
Yeah, he's exactly what I think you'd want in that role. Right? If I was going to pay, X amount a month to follow somebody who's got true expertise on a team, like you want them to have lived it, or if they're new to it, like be so immersed in it. And I think that's him. And I think what I like most is that his voice is veteran, right? It's matured, right? Like he has a really thoughtful lens, which is why, of course, we wanted him on here as we try to pride ourselves on being thoughtful around the sport that we love here in college football. He is that. He's given a great preview at a few positions already at onmontlake.com. He will finish that up in advance of spring ball. This will also be your audio primer for you if you're getting ready for UW. And I do think, to your point, Jim, he just gleans what it's like to be, an independent business owner. And I think that's really cool. And it's something that we always write in our newsletters at yoption.com, but we're really proud to start this. And it only continues with the continued support from all of you. So thank you to our paid subscribers, those behind the paywall, those are just in our email thread or listening to this show. Thank you. We love you. None of this happens without you as we are beginning really being in depth here in spring football. I'm going to go see a couple practices. USC kicks off. They have already kicked off, actually, by the time this show comes out. UCLA is on the verge next week of kicking off. And then I'm on my way to Columbus. I'm on my way to Eugene, on my way to Seattle, as we referenced in this conversation. So we will have you covered spring ball, the draft, and all the things in between. So keep it locked. yoption.com, and make sure you give some love over at onmontlake.com as well. Of course, a big thank you to you, Jim, and a huge thank you to our proud partner, 76, keeping you in the know on the go, go, go. Because of them, we have people like Christian on this platform. All right, there it is. I'm back to the film. Lots of love. Stay steady, folks. Peace.